Hi students, welcome to HSC Biology and Module 6, Genetic Change. This is the final video in this particular module, and we're going to just try and pull together some of the ideas around biotechnology influences. So the goal of this one is for you to actually interpret a range of secondary sources. So to realistically do that, we're going to need to have a look in class. I'm going to need to provide you with a few different examples in order for you to be able to assess the influence of social, economic, and cultural contexts on a range of biotechnologies. We want to talk about reciprocal interactions as well. So not just the influence that society may have on the development of some of these technologies, but also how some of these technologies have impacted on society. So as usual, we've given you three different levels from basically understanding that there are different forces that impact on the development of biotechnologies, to contrast some of those different types of forces, and then to look at how influential each one is in terms of the biotechnologies or genetic technologies, reproductive technologies that we've been talking about throughout this module. So I guess at the center of a lot of what we've been talking about is ethics, concerns over the environment, what we're releasing into the environment, and so GMOs are one of our key discussion points here. Concerns about animal welfare and how we use animals to further our knowledge and understanding, and also concerns around human safety and confidentiality. What are we doing in order to try and keep humans safe, ensure that the technologies that we're developing have a positive impact on populations, but also to be able to maintain levels of confidentiality, particularly when we're looking at human trials. So the three major considerations that we want to think about in terms of how these might impact on the development of biotechnologies. The first is social. And in looking at these three, the two that I think are probably difficult to contrast in a sense are social and cultural. So really the difference between social and cultural is really one of scale. Social influences are personal ones. How they affect me, my life, what I do on a day-to-day basis, my family, my education, my health, obviously, personal politics, religion, any of those sorts of things that are what we regard as social. And so there may be different social implications on me and my neighbours, for example. At a cultural level, that is similar, but then what we're trying to look at is like larger groups of populations or individuals. So we don't just look at how it impacts on an individual, but we look at how the suburb, the state, the country is impacted by particular forces. So in this case, obviously, we're thinking about how society may drive these biotechnological decisions. And of course, the key thing with a lot of this stuff is around decision making. That classic quote we've talked about before of should we? Or indeed, what should we? What sort of things do we know how to do? What sort of things should we be doing? Should we be cloning humans, for example? Is there an argument that this is just something that falls well outside of what's ethically reasonable, and so therefore maybe our automatic response to that is no, we shouldn't? But of course, there can be conflicts between individuals who think we should at the social level and maybe the wider society, which says, no, actually, I don't think we should be doing that. And the other one that I haven't talked about is that middle one, that economic influence. So this often comes into play between things like government or the public good and private enterprise. One of the problems, I guess it's a problem, is that private enterprise often has a lot more money to invest, but then is more often interested in a return on that money. Governments do provide a number of organisations, a number of departments, a number of grants that allow for the continuation of scientific research, and then often the benefits of those discoveries are widely available to all. Private enterprise, on the other hand, often restricts access and usually has an economic model that's associated with that. So it comes down to the usual forces that drive economies: supply and demand, cost, benefit. And that is going to be very different depending on whether or not something's being funded by a government organisation or by a private company. So these are the sorts of things that we want you to be considering when we talk about some of this stuff, when we talk especially about some of the reproductive technologies, the genetic technologies. There can be areas, for example, where should reproductive technologies be used to help a couple who are unable to have children in I'll call it a natural way. Even that word natural has connotations, has implied value judgments in behind it. And that's what's very difficult when we talk about each of these things, because different people have a different normal or natural. Different people will bring something slightly different to the table. And again, it comes down to, if we have these technologies, if we know how to do these techniques, does that just mean we should be able to use them in all situations? Or if not, what sort of factors are going to govern the decision-making process? And just a few final considerations, and one little challenge that I'll give you. There's a student who is sitting in the back of this particular slide, and what I want to do when we get to class is I want to talk about this student, but I'm not going to identify him at this point, because I want you to find out a little bit more about him. And really, he comes in here. He comes into the human subjects in clinical trials. What's that about? Why is that an important consideration, especially in this area of genetic technologies? We talked a little bit about the effects on the environment and potential harm if we're releasing genetically modified organisms into the environment and aren't sure exactly how that's going to go. If pollen created by a genetically modified plant is blowing around or being transported by insects, what are the potential implications of that? Is there a way that we can regulate and control that so that doesn't just happen widely in the environment? Could people actually use some of these technologies to devastate other populations, to wage wars against individual nations in a form of bioterrorism? How do people maintain their safety? How do researchers continue to work in laboratories where a lot of these techniques are creating new genes, new combinations, moving genes from one organism into a completely different type of organism? And what sort of potential implications are there on the safety and also, as we've talked about, the ethics of people who are involved in these sorts of experiments? And affordability, because that comes back to our economy and who's actually doing the research. Is it private or is it public funded? Now, this is a very general overview because obviously we need some context if we're going to discuss some of these things. So we'll look at some of the examples in class, but you have your first little piece of homework for this last section, which is to see if you can identify the young man in this slide and exactly why we would want to talk about his situation. Thanks for watching.